Hi, Bahar. Nice to meet you.
Hi.
I'm
Hi,
Amanda.
nice to
I'm the
see
one
you.
who sent you an email yesterday. We are waiting for Paula to arrive. She's a little bit late, but if she doesn't arrive in, I don't know, maybe 5 minutes, I think that you can start the lecture, if that's all
Of
right.
course. Let's wait. Let's have everyone seated and all. So super nice to see you.
Yes, nice to see you as well. This is everyone in the class. I don't know if
Yeah.
you gotta say hi.
Hi, everyone. Nice to see you.
Yeah. So we'll just wait for a few more minutes.
Sure. Sure, let's do that.
Hi,
Hi,
Bahar.
Paula.
Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you. Yes, yes, likewise.
I'd like to introduce you to our class today. And this is a course that deals with the idea that city is made by women and has a gender and intersectional approach that we should use to look to urban production. And today, this class is part of a bigger group of classes of international experiences, and we are very happy that you accepted it and that you're here. And I hope we can meet in other situations personally. So I will ask you to start the class introducing yourself.
Okay.
And a little bit about your investigation, and then we won't control time, but we have about 1 hour and a half of class and debate together. So please, we will turn off the microphone because we keep here talking like
Okay. Okay. Just one thing before we start. I just recognized the bandwidth. The connection is a little slow. I'll change it to another network, so you might lose me for a second, but don't panic. I'm here, and I'll be back. Okay.
Yeah.
Just coming back.
For us, you are perfect. Stop. Word perfect.
I'm back. This should work.
Okay.
So I see you're already muted, so I will take over and say hi to everyone and introduce myself to start with. So, hi everyone. I can't hear you, but I can see you and I see the nice welcome with your wavings and all. So thank you very much. First of all, thanks for the invitation, Paula. I'm really happy to be a guest to your class. Was the name City, Gender, and Intersectionality, right? And so super nice that this class is there, the course is there. I'm really happy. And I try to be contributing to that. And let me just mention a little bit about myself. I am originally Bahar Sakizlioglu, originally from Turkey, based in the Netherlands, a long-time migrant. Has been years that I'm in this country. Came for my PhD and settled, and now working and have family and all. And I'm a sociologist, urban sociologist, working on feminist urban issues. Started with political economy approach, working on accumulation by dispossession, displacement, and gentrification issues for my master thesis and after my PhD. And during the last phases of my PhD and in my postdoc, I decided to make a shift to feminist studies, and because the field taught me to do so, because of the certain things being swept under the carpet with other approaches. So I decided to take up on feminist methodology and feminist theory to actually look at the fundamental urban transformation and restructuring processes from urban processes at large from a feminist perspective. So I will today present you the longitudinal study. Actually, this is the neighborhood from Istanbul. I'll take you to Istanbul. Good news. We will have a journey to the neighborhoods of Istanbul, to Tarlabaşı namely. And this is a longitudinal study that I started in my during my master thesis way back time, like in 2005, almost 20 years now. And I continued working on the same neighborhood during my PhD, postdoc, and after my postdoc, I have some break to that longitudinal work, but I think I will continue after some work to be done. And so let me share my screen and start the very content. And I'm now at the Institute of Housing and Urban Development Studies in the Netherlands. Let me just talk about that as well. And we teach at the master's level land and housing justice. So that's my expertise beyond the feminist studies. So I'm sharing my screen. Okay. I will not be able to see you anymore. So if you want to get my attention, please unmute and then tell me what you want to tell me, because I'm only seeing my slides.
Okay.
That will be it.
If you put it in full screen mode, it would be better for us to visualize it.
Can you see the full screen? It is full screen for me now.
No, it's not full screen yet. It's on the PowerPoint page.
That is weird because I have it on the full. That's weird.
There's no mystery. Sometimes
right now? Right now, do you see it in the full screen?
No, it's still on the PowerPoint, but it's fine. We can
okay, I will stop sharing and then share again because it is so weird. I just put it on the full screen and yet you can't see it as the full. Okay, now it should turn to slideshow mode. Did it?
No, but it's fine. We can see it. We have a big screen.
One more time. Wait. So I will first put it into full screen to see if that works, but that's difficult.
You should share only the presentation tab.
Only the presentation I am sharing, yes. Okay, Microsoft tab.
Don't worry, sometimes it happens here with me also.
Okay, so that is the present. Yes, this is the best I can do. I'm really sorry for this. So, as I said, I will present the displacement experiences, like the title. Let me just tell you the title, Revisiting Displacement and Social Reproduction Nexus. I'll talk about the feminist ethnography of gendered dispossessions in gentrifying Tarlabaşı in Istanbul. So I will be presenting displacement experiences of low-income women living and working in a low-income neighborhood under the threat of state-led gentrification in Istanbul, Tarlabaşı. So what is on the agenda today? I will do a little bit of theory. That is the must. Some displacement, gentrification, and linking displacement and gentrification through feminist theory to crisis of social reproduction. After doing that, I will mention about the feminist, the methodology of this research, then the gendered experiences of displacement and dispossession in this gentrifying neighborhood. And after that, I will do the conclusion and reflections of this study. So if I start with the theory, first, the gentrification literature is an ocean. I mean, in a very nutshell, maybe if I make the definitions as well, gentrification is the influx of higher income residents or users coming into a neighborhood as the result of a investment in built environment, which results in displacement of low-income residents, right? I mean, it's in a very nutshell. It's an ocean literature, but that's the definition I take. And scholars discuss gentrification and displacement in the literature, in the in gentrification literature. And displacement is basically the forced move as the result of gentrification. So those are the two very nutshell definitions I'm making. So if we in that,
I'm sorry
yeah,
to interrupt. The slides aren't showing. We're still on the first slide.
but that is.
You could send us the
You want me to send the slides to you?
yeah, and then we can share.
Or maybe you could share, or you could save a PDF file. I don't know if you have any animation in your PowerPoint, but
No, I
think
don't. No, I don't.
with the PDF file, it would be easier to share the screen with us.
Okay, let me see if I can. Okay. I'll try my best very quickly because it's not PDF, but I can make it into PDF. Okay, save. So it's opening, and I will now share my screen to see what you will be seeing. Yes, this is the Adobe Oba. So if I close this one,
Yes.
can you see it in full screen now?
It's not in full screen mode, but we can see it pretty much as a full screen.
So this is the actual size, the full screen mode. Now?
Yes, now it's on full screen mode.
Yeah?
Perfect.
Okay.
Yes.
So if I go, I was
yes,
already
it's working
past
now.
these ones. Is it moving also?
Yes, it's moving.
It is.
Okay, great.
Sorry
So
to
I will.
interrupt you.
Yes, great. Thank you very much for the interruption. It's great for you there, and it will be also easier now for me. So I mentioned I made the definitions of gentrification and displacement, and here what I want to say is that in the ocean of this literature of gentrification, there are really few studies at comparatively speaking, few studies of at the intersection of class and gender, and so the ones that are basically approach gentrification from the emancipatory city thesis, which means that actually gentrification has been mostly discussed as an emancipatory process for women and LGBTQI people suffering from patriarchy and homophobia in these neighborhoods and finding home in these neighborhoods. And these are mostly seen as the non-traditional household types, pioneer gentrifiers who have less money and maybe a bit more cultural capital type of people in the literature. And this literature, however, only focuses on the middle class and lower middle class women and LGBTQI people, and sidelining the experiences of lower class women and LGBTQI people in working class, in gentrifying neighborhoods. So this is basically the gap in the literature. It used to be the gap. Maybe there's a bit more studies right now. And so if we look at the displacement literature, the focus is getting more, okay, I didn't change the slide. Yes, okay. So and if we look at the displacement literature, the literature is just moving to a more relational and temporal direction, which means that scholars are criticizing downgrading of displacement to only out migration or relocation. So something that happens at a point in time, but they take it as a process, right? And they capture the scope and the consequences of this process. And what does it mean to stay put in a neighborhood that is gentrifying, for instance? What does it mean to go through the process of displacement pressure? So these are the relational and temporal perspectives coming into the literature, and which is very exciting. But this exciting literature lacks feminist ethnographies of what scholars call as everyday displacements, right? I mean, this temporal aspect brings about the everyday displacements being discussed in the literature, but we still lack the feminist perspective. So what happens to different groups of women and LGBTQI living under the pressure of displacement? So that is the gap in the literature. So in this work, I see displacement as a fragment, or as a snapshot of housing dispossession, which is a bigger concept. And dispossession is like, in a very nutshell, it's just being deprived of housing, right? Or the process of being this deprivation of housing as a possession. That is just this possession, as in the word itself. So I see gentrification and displacement as spatial and social manifestation of a crisis of social reproduction as well. And what do I mean with social reproduction? Social reproduction is everything that we do to pursue our lives beyond working time. Right? I mean, I'm putting everything, this entire feminist literature on social reproduction in one sentence, so I'm citing many feminists here. And that includes, like, from doing dishes to giving birth to caring for elderly and etc. And crisis of social reproduction, what does that mean then? You know, social reproduction, we defined it. Crisis of social reproduction then is that actually, like, one very simple way of putting it would be that people are either deprived of resources to actually reproduce themselves and their communities, or they have to work to an extent that they actually cannot have time to pursue their lives. So, for instance, an example would be that they have to order food because they don't have the time for cooking, or they have to ask a neighbor to look after their kid because they have to work, or they have to run other care duties. And this is happening in a context of neoliberal urbanism, where governments reduces social services, and the responsibility for care falls upon the shoulders of the households, and that means basically women. And if you see also the trends of, like, aging population and growing participation of women in labor market, all these are putting pressures in this care duties, and then creating this care gap or crisis of social reproduction. So what did I tell? Why did I tell all this, right? I mean, I told you about, like, gentrification, displacement, social reproduction, crisis of social reproduction. So what do they have with each other? So how do I tie this all? So I see gentrification as a spatial and social solution for middle classes to manage their time-space budgets. For instance, they move to city centers to economize on being close to services, being close to work, and that eases their social reproduction and help them manage their lives and reproduce themselves better, right? And on the other hand, gentrification brings about displacement to low-income people, and displacement affects lower-income households and communities' ability to secure social reproduction. altering their access to housing, their access to work, their access to social networks, which are crucial for them to reproduce themselves, to care for themselves and for their communities. So the link is like tying gentrification and displacement to crisis of social reproduction through feminist perspective makes us see these connections and ties these processes. So what happens here is that gentrification and displacement helping middle class to reproduce themselves and depriving lower classes of their resources to reproduce themselves displace crisis of social reproduction onto working class households, right? This is what I'm trying to say. And these people struggle to survive gentrification and displacement and survive their own lives or continue their own lives. And this, in the literature, if you also look at it, pursuing social reproduction or continuing life, basically, or living under the threat of displacement in gentrifying neighborhoods is a very gendered process as well. So scholars mention about like women having to work double or having to deal with the threats of evictions because they are the most users of the space in the neighborhoods or in households, etc. Yet there is little research in here, and therefore this research that I will be telling you about. But before that, I tell you how I did this research, and that is the logic behind this research methodology, and also the very practical part, like the feminist practice of ethnography. So I think in a very nutshell, the feminist practice of ethnography aims to get a deeper understanding of the lives and experiences of, in my case, disadvantaged women and LGBTQI people who are not often at the center of knowledge production and in our literatures, right? And it's not on the agenda of the policymakers as well. And especially the lower lower income ones. So and feminist ethnography or feminist methodology at large, it emphasizes the positionality of the researcher and the critical perspective on, and puts a critical perspective on knowledge production, and it underlines the partiality of what we can know. You can only know based on your own position, based on your own background, and accepting this, the partiality of this knowledge actually is a step towards objectivity, if there's any objectivity possible, which isn't, basically. And if we also look at what feminist ethnography or feminist methodology makes possible, is that it, if you like step back, like the power of feminist theory is basically to tie the very micro, the intimate, the body, to the very macro, to the very global. So we will come to that point at the very end of this discussion or this presentation. But the idea is basically to talking about global processes of this dispossession, like accumulation by dispossession, and tying it to the very emotional labor that this displacement process brings to women and LGBTQI suffering this pressure of displacement. So it helps us to tie these everyday bodily experiences to the very macro global scales. So it's a transmitter between different scales. So the very nitty-gritty details. So the fieldwork, of course, like was taken in Tarlabaşı, I told you, from 2005 to 2019, I think. It was before Corona, like right before Corona hit. It was finished the postdoc period, and postdoc was 4 years, so it is 2015, 16 to 2019. And so what I did here was basically the 25 interviews, a lot of small talk, as you see, like the people in the picture, just in their words. I was the doorstep researcher. And I think the most challenging part of this ethnography or long-term ethnography was to interview women in the public and in semi-public spaces. So it actually meant that I had to, or we had to, as the women talking or having the interview, had to deal with like men hijacking the interviews through mansplaining or why was I not interviewing them but the woman, and all those countless times of explaining and trying to go on with the interview. And so I think the basically these conversations were done in a way that I wasn't the researcher. Of course, I was the researcher, but it was mostly taking us to a space or to a sharing in the way that we shifted different positions and asked each other different questions and approached each other as women of different backgrounds, and that made the conversation more lively and also the very feminist understanding of production or co-production of knowledge. And that, I mean, I think I should just leave it like this because I can talk about feminist ethnography ages. Let me just come to the portrayal of the neighborhood like before the renewal happened. So I decided after some time to actually approach the neighborhood as a queer space, and I'll tell you why. And Tarlabaşı actually was a place, a low-income neighborhood that is very close to the very center heartbeat of the city. And Istanbul is a city of inequalities, big inequalities, which is not familiar to you in Sao Paulo. And in the neighborhood, there's heteronormative and conservative gender relations, and norms are dominant. But it hosts all dispossessed, left out, displaced populations, and in that sense, it is queer space in a very philosophical way, and it also hosts like different solidarity possibilities between different disadvantaged and queer populations, because people are relegated to live in this neighborhood, and they actually there is a very delicate balance between different groups due to this relegation of living or to living to this neighborhood. And then it makes this it's not a rosy picture that I'm trying to draw here, but due to this relegation or collective living, having to live in this neighborhood, people create unusual or non-conforming solidarities and sometimes temporalities between different groups. So if I look at the gender practices and uses of Tarlabaşı streets before the renewal happened, which caused gentrification and displacement, the streets of Tarlabaşı were sites of collective social reproduction. As women would prepare food, clean carpets, look after kids in the streets, and streets were the sites of solidarity as these like house chores were being shared, and they also socialized with other people. And it was also due to the small housing in the neighborhood, so they had seriously small spaces, and the streets were the second living room basically for all. And women would host their guests, develop networks, socialize in the streets. They would also work in the streets, and they would do peace-based work, prepare street food and all. And lastly, some streets in Tarlabaşı were the sites for sex work in the neighborhood, and they were quite clear and known, with known boundaries, and there were quite clear temporalities of use regarding these streets. Like at night, the population would be totally different than in the daytime. So I have here some pictures. For me, these are really old, but I guess for you quite new. And thanks to the neighborhood photographer that you will see at the end of the presentation, to Ali, I have all these pictures from the everyday of women. As I press, gets a bit weird. Yeah. So if we continue with the Tarlabaşı renewal process, so Tarlabaşı, the neighborhood, was designated as a renewal area, where the municipality promoted state-led gentrification via the transformation of this area, like through transforming this area into an upper-class neighborhood through a public-private partnership. And the property owners were given the right to come back, but they had to pay quite some amount of money, and they were to be indebted, and they had the right to go live in the peripheries of the city, having the right to buy a social housing, so-called social housing. It's just home ownership based, and they also had they also had the chance to get some compensation for their moving during the project if they wanted to come back, which did not happen often. And for the renters, official renters, which was almost like 5% of the entire population, they were offered to have some compensation for their moving, but there was nothing else. Compensation was just for moving to somewhere else and nothing else. And 75% of the population, which were mostly the informal renters and squatters, they were offered basically nothing for their displacement. And if we look at the project, it was initiated by the municipality, the mayor, which is on the right in this picture, to my right on this picture, and the prime minister was the architecture of this law that required the renewal of the historical areas and gave a lot of powers to the municipal and central government to designate these places as renewal areas, and then to have right to expropriate the properties if people would not be agreeing on the terms that the municipalities would bring them. So it was quite an authoritarian take on renewal, which caused a lot of displacement. And if we look at, the mayor called Tarlabaşı as poisoned princess. I will come back to that. And that's also the sort of the savior mode of the very gendered and savior mode of the municipality saving this neighborhood from its current state. Used to be a princess owned by the non-Muslim minority community back in time, used to be elite and all. And if we look at the promotional pictures of the Renewal Project, it depicts middle-class white women as the users, flaneurs, or owners of this new Tarlabaşı, which looks bright and refurbished, a classical gentrification story. And more pictures here. And then let's get into the gender dispossession, our main focus here, right? So after this, like as this process started, there were quite some, it's just a part, let me just say this one more time. So this renewal area was a part right in the middle of the bigger area of Tarlabaşı. So it wasn't the entire neighborhood, but it was just right in the middle. And as the construction started, they cut this area off with like high aluminium walls, basically, and women felt less safe in the areas adjacent to renewable area. And because there were influx of newcomers to the vacant buildings around this area. And as the neighbors were moving, there was less social control in the area, and more drug dealing, use, and as this boarded up streets cut the connection of the side streets to the main artery, affected women's feelings of safety in the neighborhood, and it was really difficult for them, even though they were using the streets like as in their living room before, they felt threatened to go out, especially at night, without the company of males in the family, and started using certain streets only, as others felt too unsafe due to the less social control and the newcomers in the area. And of course, like drug dealing or sex work is nothing new for this neighborhood, but as the composition of these people changed, the social cohesion and the control mechanisms changed in the neighborhood, and people started not knowing who was who and who was doing what, and that created some issue of unsafety and feeling threatened by the other newcomers. So as the result, women started using the streets less, and this collective practicing of social reproduction, as I told you, like using the streets for housing, for reproduction practices, ceased. I mean, it wasn't there anymore. People used their homes for household chores and their home-based work, and which made them more isolated to their private space, right? I mean, this blur distinction between the private and the public before the renewal just cut off, because women had to go back to this so-called private space and not claim the public space as their private spaces. So this is the regendering of the streets of Tarlabaşı right after the process started, and you can just see some ghost streets like this was the ones that I'm talking about, like passing through a street like this who is not no one is living, was really difficult for quite some women. And all this long process of living under the threat of displacement resulted in increased material and emotional labor for women, because women were the ones dealing with the daily problems of long-lasting disinvestment in the neighborhood, right? Like broken stairs or not functioning pipes. And they were the ones who were at home when the municipality came, cutting the electricity, threatening them with the eviction notices. And they were the ones, like, they lost the neighbors, their social networks, and it was quite heavy for women, especially elderly women, to feel out of their own habitus, basically. And women were the ones managing the emotional budget of their households, like imagine be the angry husband or partner coming from a municipal meeting and calming down that partner, or just dealing with, or just having a talk with a neighbor who lost their homes, and all these emotional labors were on the shoulders of mostly women. And some of them also started to work due to economic burden of displacement. So it was double, triple shifts for some of them. And some pictures. I will look at the time and then I will think about, yes, I can mention about this. So I want to give one example of, like, just to make this emotional and material labor like more clear to you, just as this is just one field note that I had from Sidika. It was a single mother with 2 daughters who stayed in the neighborhood and wasn't displaced immediately, and one of the last to leave. And she felt threatened by the changes in her neighborhood. And there were some youngsters making fire in front of her entrance door as she was waiting for her daughter to come back home. And she was also scared to warn them, because she didn't know how they would respond, right? And also calling police is really no-go in this neighborhood. So no one calls police. Everything is just dealt within the neighborhood itself. And so she was anxiously waiting every night for the daughter's arrival behind a thick curtain. And she wanted, but she could not afford to get out of the neighborhood. And she had to wait till the last moment that she was replaced to some other place. And accompanying this, she also, like every day, with this keeping up her dignity, she wanted to keep her house clean. And outside there was this thick, like, smoke of fire, because these youngsters were making the fire outside the entrance door I told you. And she had to paint this wall almost every week. And she was just complaining from this chronic pain in her shoulder. And that was like, I mean, from my notes back in time, it's just like this pain in the shoulder. It's actually like embodying this everyday displacement that this person is going through, and everyday housing dispossession, the emotional labor that is put, right? And being under the threat of this dispossession. So, okay, I will come back to this point later, but let's just move on with the third point I'm trying to make here, or the third result. This, like, the gender dispossession is related to displacement of queer Tarlabaşı, as I told you before. The sex workers, mostly transgender women living and working in the area, were displaced. And it wasn't only the places like the homes of these people, but it was also the bars, cafes, hairdressers that hosted this gender non-conforming groups living in Tarlabaşı. So these people, some of them moved to nearby districts, and the ones who could not afford to move out, they stayed put. And they started using these, like, vacant places as the spaces of work, like sex work. And that became basically made this like losing the working places, losing their meeting places, and carrying sex work to the streets, to the vacant houses, and making it so visible, right? I mean, it was visible in the streets, more visible. And then that also affected, increased, or just threatened these delicate balances in the neighborhood, because the neighbors did not want to see the sex work happening right in the streets, which wasn't the case before, right? And that threatens, that started threatening these intersectional solidarities between or intersectional bearings, let's say, between different groups. So they started looking at each other in a more with practices of othering, and they didn't want to live with those neighbors anymore. And so that's one result of the ongoing displacement at the time. And the fourth one that I found, which I'm busy with right now. So this was a huge, long process of disinvestment in the neighborhood, right? And the displacement also took like years. So it was a process of like 10 years from when people heard that the neighborhood was to be renewed till the last person in that area was displaced. It was 10 years of going under the pressure of displacement. So as this displacement as this disinvestment in the hood deepened, so the place also became home to more marginalized newcomers. The ones who could go, they went, and the vacant places did not stay vacant. I mean, they, as I said, like some of them were just used as sex workers' place, and some became like I don't know, home to marginalized newcomers like Syrian migrants, Syrian refugees who had no choice but to live in this inadequate and cheap housing. And this also included groups with different gender norms and practices like polygamy, for instance. And this was used by some Kurdish men in the area as a threat, to discipline their partners. And it was just basically like you would hear from women that their husbands actually, or partners, actually threatening them to find another woman, which is just common in the neighborhood. And it was just pointing to reinforced masculinity or restored masculinity in the neighborhood. So this situation also worked to pit Kurdish women against Syrian women with the accusation of like low morality or undeserving women or irresponsible mothers, hiding this male power and abuse in the area, right? And we could say like this process of displacement and gentrification actually boosted the certain masculinities in the area and pitting women against each other. And that also breaks the possibility of solidarity among women in the neighborhood. So that's that. I told you 4 different gendered results, gendered experiences and dispossessions, and from here to conclusions and reflections I will come. So what did I tell you so far? I said this process harming gendered collective social reproduction practices, and it recenters masculinity in the streets, basically controlling the use of the streets for women and their bodies, like the mobility of their bodies in the public space, and making streets less safe for them. And it increases material and emotional labor burdened by low-income women and LGBTQI. It erases queer culture and people from the city center, and it decreases chances of solidarity among different groups, among different genders, and it also is a very clear picture that these everyday struggles against housing dispossession and displacement are very gendered, right? I mean, the entire story that I'm telling you is the story of intersectionality and gender. Okay, so these are the very case-specific conclusions that I have. So if I just try to abstract it a bit more, to come back to the theoretical story and the methodological story that I told you before, like this link between gentrification, displacement, and social reproduction, and the feminist ethnography. So what does this case study tell us regarding that? So let me do a bit more theoretical reflections and theoretical and methodological reflections here. The first is, it shows how Housing dispossession and displacement function as tools to displace crisis of social reproduction onto other geographies and onto low-income populations. It increases material and effective burdens of social reproduction for certain genders, right? And this finding actually invites us to think about how we approach this entire process. Like if you take it only as the political economy approach, many of the stories that I told you, I could have told you in different ways and in different, focusing on different groups, and maybe even not telling the stories of certain groups, right? And I would just tell them as the story of, for instance, low-income people only. But we wouldn't see the shades of the experiences of these different types of low-income people living or having to live in this neighborhood. And so secondly, this case study shows how housing struggles against housing dispossession and displacement are not only done in the squares, in the squares or in city halls, right? I mean, everyday struggles to continue social reproduction can be embodied and emotional labor to resist the pressures of dispossession. And it can be like resisting to municipal officers cutting electricity, or it can be the solidarity shown to like a neighbor who lost their home. So it also tells about like the resistance and different forms of everyday struggles and how embodied they are, as in the story that I told you, the pain in the shoulder. And thirdly, I think this is an interesting one in the process of place unmaking. So I'm talking about how a neighborhood is destroyed, basically, right? And place unmaking, not making, but unmaking, and this heavy dispossessions. So you see the very crystal clear the importance of queer spaces and how queer spaces in disadvantaged neighborhoods do have a function, and how actually making cities queer is possible without making them more expensive, right? And engaging in like everyday sociology of emancipation, basically. Of course, there is nothing rosy about this picture, but I told you about the intersectional solidarities and in this queer neighborhood, and it was possible under dire conditions. So that is also giving some food for thought for, sociology of queer culture in low-income neighborhoods. And the last one is the feminist perspective or ethnography, like the perspective in methodology. So it actually helps us understand the gendered nature, gendered scope, and impacts of displacement and gentrification, right? I mean, it's quite clear. And it also helps us to connect the micro to the very macro, like the pain in the shoulder to accumulation by dispossession. So that is actually what made me turn to feminist studies, in a very nutshell. And I think it is important to, like, tying gentrification to crisis of social reproduction. It also enables us to investigate the very everyday ways and everyday struggles about or around continuing life or continuing social reproduction in these changing neighborhoods, like gentrifying neighborhoods. And I think it is a very powerful tool to reveal these untold side of the story. Okay, I will do one last thing. I will thank to all these poisoned princesses. That was the quote unquote the mayor's term, and that helped make this research. And I will also thank the neighborhood photographer Ali Öz, whose photos I'm using in this presentation. And I will now, I think it's very well time, and that we can just start the discussion, your questions, and I'll stop sharing my screen.
Thank you very much, Bahar. I really enjoy your presentation. And now we will open to questions. And before that, I would say that I like it, especially this idea of queer space as an intersectional solidarity. I don't know, because sometimes we use queer concepts to say something about sexuality.
Yeah.
So it is a broader way, it expands the concept. Very, very interesting. And to break the ice, I start asking you an urban question. Why Tarlabaşı? I don't know if I say it correctly.
Why Tarlabaşı? Yes.
Look into
Oh,
your,
that's.
look into your picture, we see it in the middle of everything constructed, and it is used. So how do they choose this place to be a displacement place? And if you could tell us about a little more, how is it today? Has it already been demolished or new it? And tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah. Okay. So there is a big why, a big answer to why Tarlabaşı was selected. I mean, Istanbul is a city of gentrification, and gentrification has been taking place with, of course, state support, with through zoning or through certain subsidies and all that, but this has changed around the time these laws or inflation of laws started, where state actually decided to take a very active role in pushing the transformation of low income, like this is the historical neighborhood right in the middle of the city, and also the squatter neighborhoods, like the gecekondu neighborhoods, as we call them. Gecekondu means built overnight. And those two areas were targeted to change, to open up, because they were not changing by themselves, and they were not there were so many neighborhoods that were taking or attracting investment by the market actors. It was possible to do it. But if you think about a neighborhood like Tarlabaşı, I told you, a place for like sex work, drugs, and low income, internally displaced, and also international migrants. It's sort of like a waiting room for Europe, this place. I mean, a lot of like migrants coming from many countries of Asia and Africa, with the idea of jumping or going to the Europe, but they stay put actually in this neighborhood. And it's like a place of everything and everyone, and the left outs, as I said, like the displaced. And I think the history of this neighborhood is a history of displacement in the contemporary Turkish history. You could just read that easily. And it wasn't possible for investors to come and sort of clean this place and make it ready for investment, because you wouldn't be able to sell a very luxurious condo in the middle of this everything. So it wasn't ripe enough for investment. So it needed some investors. It needed some intervention of the public, of the municipal authorities, to actually clear the space for investment. right, to make it actually ripe for investment. So in that sense, the hands of the municipality was needed. And it's also very strategic. It's right in the middle of the neighborhood. And if you make this, shut, sort of like, okay, this is the area we will renew, and then the rest, it will spread out, if you have some examples, then there is enough investors in Istanbul, no worries about that. And there will be a lot more investment taking place by itself, which was a story of the past, especially before Corona. And the investment potential went down really badly at the time. And they could not actually deliver the houses. And it was, maybe I didn't tell you that, but they were to make luxurious housing, a hotel, and office space, and some cultural entertainment areas as well in these 9 blocks or housing blocks. And it has been done. Some of the blocks have been delivered and opened, and they were looking for some international investment for those, like some Chinese and Russian investment went in, and right now it is halfway. It's really, like, I think 4 years behind the project delivery. It's still not happening, but the effects are there. Of course, that was also the sites of this designated area were already gentrifying slowly. And there were, like, I don't know, youth hostels, like cultural centers, more like hippie places, not yuppie, hippie places, more like, the pioneer gentrification stage. And later, like this area that was intervened was the most problematic from the eyes of the municipality. So this is why Tarlabaşı. And then second question was, I forgot, Paula. So what happened? So I already answered the question, right? Yeah. What happened? How is it right now? So it already spread it to other. And I'm curious, the people sitting, was it a lot? It was a lot of concepts, maybe a lot of story coming from the other side of the world. Like, how did it resonate to your city, to your experience, to your course? Tell me.
Very interesting because
And one thing, I don't hear you well. You need to get closer to the computer, because even Paula, I hear ruptured.
I
Yes, thank you.
it was interesting. Like Amanda was telling Paula that it looks a bit like a neighborhood in the center of São Paulo as well. Bus.
Yes.
It's
Mhm.
also a very precarious place in regards to housing, and it has, like, the municipal and other public authorities have tried since the 90s or 80s to
Mhm.
change that place into a place attractive to financial investment.
Yeah.
And it's also a queer space and also related to sex work. And it's interesting how it happens around the world. And I think São Paulo and Istanbul are similar sized cities, so it makes sense that the same processes happen. Yeah. I don't know if I have a question, but I feel
Yeah.
that from the lecture.
Yeah,
But
also, I think the governmental structures, informality, and, the migration, quite some of those histories also are, of course, not the same, but similar, especially compared to the global north stories that we hear about gentrification and displacement. Yeah.
And also this idea of criminal places, like they should be changed.
Yeah. Yeah.
Uh, that's not by chance that they choose central areas, because we have these historical places,
Yeah.
and that have here also many squares, many poor areas. It's a popular place, the central area. So So that's why we used to say that it's not by chance. I mean, it has devaluated and it's very well located.
Yeah.
The prices nearby have already been gentrified, as you said, so it looks very much into our place. But you know, here we call this neighborhood here as luz. Light should be the translation in this.
Okay, luz.
And this place is a very masculine place. And very drug addicted and no women in the streets. So we could see another gender approach. Hearing you, I was thinking about that I have never thought about such a masculine place where women are not, or if they are, there are many squads and families also. But we have a drug addiction scene very intense here. So it changes a little bit the family issue. There are not so many families like children and all of these things. They are in the squat buildings. They are more I don't know. But they are in the place. They exist and they put these families. When they are going to be squatted, women are in the front of the evicted.
Yes.
They put women and old people, children, and all of the things just in front of it. And we sometimes make invisible the existence of these families. And
yes.
Talking with Fernando Mello, he was a secretary of urban secretary at the city hall, and he said that they put some playgrounds for children, and suddenly happened that many children were at the area, so there was some hidden. You couldn't see them.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like to hear you by Barbara. I'm saying that we can translate sometimes.
Yes, of course. Just say it in Portuguese and then, or I don't know if it's Portuguese or any other language that you're using.
Barbara is trying to say, see if you hear.
Okay.
I think you need to come closer. If you want to sit here,
Yes, to make it more.
Question, Chair.
It was very
Yes.
hearing about the perspective of the queer spaces, because one of the themes of another class that we had was queer spaces, and we studied the difference between São Francisco and the case of São Paulo. In São Paulo, we saw through this 60s today about that space, and we studied exactly the displacement of sex workers and queer men that were occupying in the first place for example, the sex workers were in spaces, in closed off spaces that were sort of legal and then turned to the streets when it became illegal, and the moving of the spaces that were occupied by those groups with the advance of higher class projects. So it was really interesting to see it happen in other places in the world and how it is really similar but also different. And I just wanted to point that out, but I don't know.
Yeah.
It's just that I just find it really interesting.
Yeah, I think what is really striking in that story of queer spaces. I mean, also for my PhD, for instance, I couldn't see this. Seriously, I couldn't see this. I was just after, like, this is a story of a low-income neighborhood, so people are displaced. So, you know, that was it basically. Like if you read my PhD, you would not see any of these stories at all. But it's totally about your perspective to space, how you look at things, how you know, this is what I'm saying, like the partiality and the positionality at the time that I took was totally different than later when I looked at the space and different stories I saw, and there was no one story that was quite clear, right? And I think the most crucial thing there as well, like, I mean, what Paula was saying, like, you know, the space becomes more maybe like woman friendly or LGBTQI friendly after this transformations happening. But I think this is from a very classed perspective, like a very middle class perspective of like, I mean, that's important to see the intersection of class and certain masculinities and femininities here. It's important, like, you know, how that is shaping the way we look at the space, how we actually see these signals, who is using what. Like, I think we get stuck with this maybe from a very middle class, you know, like femininity's perspective, like this toxic masculinity that you see on the streets of like the low income neighborhoods. It's just very dominant, very you know, heteronormative norms, and this is also the case in Tarlabaşı. I'm saying this is not the case. It is the dominant, you know, gender culture for sure the case. But if you start you know, ripping yourself off this classed position to gender, to sexualities, then it becomes like you just start looking at it and try to collect the pattern signals of how these different masculinities and femininities are lived and contested in these spaces, especially of spaces of relegation. I'm saying, yeah, and people have to leave, and people, like, you know, I remember the first time, I mean, I got lost in that neighborhood many times, like socially, culturally, and spatially as well, like and just finding myself, my way as a person, and as also a researcher, as a, you know, a woman not coming from that neighborhood. Many things told me that you just really need to open your eyes and try to understand what people are saying, and how they are using this space, how they are negotiating that use, and don't also leave that nostalgia or the rosy picture of these, like, you know, great working class neighborhoods. People are you know, seriously, in the names of the first sex worker who told me this, like trying to save their asses, I will censor myself. That's basically the way the everyday works, and they can be pushed, kicked, beaten up every moment, right? There is no like dream or unreal something about this. This is very threat. But the fact that these people are living in the same neighborhood, sharing the space, the everyday, and having a word with each other is happening because of this relegation, because of this, you know, having to live there, and that breaks certain boundaries, and that makes certain meetups easier. And even though they don't want it always, you know, they find ways to get around those differences, and find their ways. So this is the very real and not rosy reality, and I find it very fascinating, and I couldn't understand it many times. I mean, it looked like people were just smiling to each other and then saying bad things all the time, behind backs, you know. That's always the case, but that is the constant competition for space and resources, and establishing yourself in that neighborhood, which is totally different in middle class and high income neighborhoods. You don't do that, you know. You just don't even have interaction with your neighbors, hi and bye and done, and those intrusions don't happen that every day. So I think that intersectional perspective gives really a lot of opportunity, or opens doors to understand the other of yourself, as well as someone approaching or being in that neighborhood. So I think that's an important fact for anyone who is interested in understanding space and social relations in that space. But I'm talking too much. Huh? I want to hear a couple of your more comments. No, that's not really okay. So
And it is
please.
not wake up them. So, but we have smiles here, what I can say.
Okay.
And I would like to put two questions that your work provoked me. One of them is this idea of the places of renewal displacements. And here when we talk about this central area that Amanda was saying, the light neighborhood, and we used to say that it used to be a continuous place of displacement.
Mm-hmm.
And historical ones, and like migrants came to industry, to work in the industry here, and then displaced it. And rich people come, and then they went out, and then poor people went, and then
Yeah.
displaced. And also, this is the place for migrants to come, and,
Yeah.
and you said the same. So this is, do you think we could say that it is the places that we are chosen to see the effects of displacement, they are a little bit renewal displacement places that repeat this place, but also that receive these migrants from war or from here, Haitianos, Bolivian, here from America Latina and,
Yep.
and the places, and
Yep.
also I would like you to comment, because in our ethnography we used to see losses, but also fights against displacement. And these fights are somehow reposition people in the space, like they became, they are together fighting for that, so they help each other to survive and to stay there. And I would like to hear a little bit more of these contradictions, the contradiction of the process, and to the
Yeah. Yeah, I did, of course, again, I didn't tell that story, right? I mean, there are so many stories to be told, and I chose this story, and there are many stories that I can tell based on the same research. So to start with the first, like the very political economy approach, it's called rent gap. That basic idea is that places the cycle of investment and disinvestment, right? If there is an investment to an area after a certain time, like it goes down and down and down, and to an extent that it becomes profitable to invest in that space again. You wouldn't just change the color or the facade of your house if it does the work. So you wait till it doesn't do the work, and then you invest again, right? I mean, these cycles of investment and disinvestment. So in these inner city historical areas, this disinvestment cycle stayed too long. So at a degree that these houses are actually inhabitable. So seriously, I mean, it was certain houses that I've been to, you would not actually imagine anyone living in that, let alone yourself. And that is like, but these are houses, huh? I mean, these are places people live, and who lives in these places. That also brings me to this another like topic, temporality. Like, I mean, these are like temporal lives. People don't come into this neighborhood thinking that they would live there 20 years. They come there as a temporal solution. They think like, of course, like an, I don't know, Nigerian migrant is coming. Okay, I will go to Europe, Amsterdam, wait for me, and then the internally displaced Kurdish comes there because his uncle is living there, and he ends up having a family and then lives like 20 years. So there is this temporality aspect, like people actually don't think that they would end up living in this neighborhood. This is why the story of relegation. So they can't get out of the neighborhood because they don't have the resources, and they don't have the social ladder waiting for them, because they lack the sources of education, they lack the economic capital, cultural capital, and all that. And that becomes like the disinvestment attracts the people who are with less resources, and those are often the migrants, and those are often the refugees, those are often sex workers or drug dealers, all the population that you would think would not fit in this middle class image of a neighborhood. And that becomes like a home, like neighborhoods like Tarlabaşı becomes home for that. And this investment and disinvestment cycle is very much related to this. And temporality also, temporalities of migration, temporalities of economic investment, and temporalities of urban renewal. So these are all, simultaneous or ongoing processes. And the second question, what was that, Paula? Again, I forgot. How was it?
About the contradictions.
Yeah, okay. So of course there was the story of resistance. Let me tell you the first, like the biggest resistance, and that was basically the neighborhood association of owners. There was an association after the renewal plans were announced, and owners came together, and there were also like big owners, non-occupiers, so they were not actually living in the area, but they owned houses. And there were also people like the big institutions like the Armenian church or Syrian church. Like, it is a non-Muslim minority neighborhood, so you had these like religious institutions in the neighborhood present as well, and they occupied, they had some property. So they came together, and big property owners in the neighborhood, together with small ones, they all came together, and they did not have the tenants, or the informal tenants were not at all in that constellation. Later in time, due to a social worker, some of them could come to the meetings, the formal renters mostly. And they could actually, like, they had a very brilliant lawyer, and who brought the case to European Court of Human Rights with the evictions and an unlawful use of expropriation, because expropriations are actually for the very unusual situations like war or like disasters. States can use expropriation for those purposes, or if there is a public road passing by, right? And it was proven at the in front of Human Rights Court in The Hague that this act doesn't require the use of such a big state force. Because basically you are taking this property from this person and then giving it to a developer. There's nothing more or less to this story, and there is no, urgency or emergency involved. So there was this legislative resistance, which went up to the European Court, and they won there, but nothing changed. I mean, that can sound similar, I guess, to Brazilian context as well. So the juridical story doesn't really lead to much due to informalities. And there was the resistance, like everyday resistance of the people. That's what I'm trying to push to say. Like, I mean, people came together to resist an eviction taking place next door, or they resisted the daily threats of the municipality, like cutting off the electricity or water, or, you know, like being annoyance to people, delivering these notices of eviction. And people resisted in ways of showing solidarity to, you know, people losing their homes, like opening one room to host them, their kids, or sharing food, or just listening. You know, I mean, I call them as forms of or everyday resistances, because this is not happening in the big squares as we understand social movements take place, right? And I think we need to take these like social movements or the resistance into the everyday life of people. And this is also a very gendered story. This is where the care, this is where the emotional labor comes into play. It was often women taking these the roles. And even in the neighborhood association, as Paula said, like if there's something happening, it's the woman with the, you know, banners and everything going in the front, because it's the home. It's traditionally the space of these women coming from traditional backgrounds. So they want to resist and protect their home. And so I see resistance, or the story of resistance, like in at different scales, you know, at the institutional organizational level, at the even at the beyond state level, that this human rights court, the juridical level that happens beyond the state even, and the organization at the neighborhood and municipality, the negotiations with the municipality, and at the very everyday level, that people take up the issue and resist the violence of the state that is basically grabbing their houses, right, and lives. So I hope this answers your question. You got tired, right? It's 1.5 hours. Come on. There's a question. You need to come to the front. I don't hear.
So this time I think I have a question. I would
Okay,
like
good.
if do you know where people moved or where they would move if they were kicked out of the neighborhood, if they would go to
Yeah.
the periphery, or there would be other central neighborhoods available?
Yeah. So most of them, like the ones I could, I mean, displacement is also a very headache topic for researchers, right? I mean, go find the people wherever they move to. So they are not there; they are invisible already. So the advantage I had, I started before this took place, before that one time, you know, this displacement that happens just one at a time happened. And many of those, like I had for my PhD, that was, so I actually followed those people who moved out of their houses, either within the neighborhood or outside the neighborhood, and talked to them. And most of them actually moved either in the bigger neighborhood. So they were actually, you know, like, I mean, they did not go further because they have lives, kids go to school, they have work, and, you know, they have to stay close in that area. But it wasn't possible for many because it also boosted the rent prices in other places. So all of a sudden, everyone was looking for a rental space. Like 75% was renting in that area, and informally renting. So that was also quite difficult. And they moved closer, and some, I think, like, there was a small portion of the population who actually wanted to move out, and they took the resettlement house that the municipality offered. That was like 30, 35 kilometers away from the neighborhood, like really no go almost. But they wanted to move, and they wanted to have nothing to do with this neighborhood. And they were actually happy. So it's not always, sad or negative story, there were also people who said that they were happy because they moved, and they thought this was better for their kids, that they were out of this area, which they thought or stigmatized also others very quite clearly, if not discriminate. So mostly, I would say, in a nutshell, like mostly around in the district itself, like Beyoğlu, they stayed, because there are also other low-income neighborhoods. In the Beyoğlu is very big, like where Tarlabaşı is located is a huge neighborhood. This is just one of the 9 neighborhoods that we talk about. And they could move to those areas, and some moved out, and the logic to that was basically either the resettlement house people moved, or they moved close to their like family. So that was the social networks, and because that was actually the how they could live by, like being close to sister or parents that would share the care responsibilities, or they doubled up, some of them, for instance. So they started living with their families.
Okay. And these resettlement houses were given by the government, or?
It wasn't given. They had the right to buy. So that means, like, I mean, there is no, like, it's like a sort of state mortgage for long term. This is like a, I think the same story in Brazil, right? That you have also the same type of like buy ownership based social housing. They offer, it's like a sort of, banlieue looking estates at the very peripheries of the houses. Actually, after 2 years, everything was totally run down again, like very bad quality, and that they just started paying like that mortgage basically, and that's also, I don't know about the ones that I talked to, because it was for my PhD. After that, I didn't follow. So now I have the idea to actually do like long-term effects sort of research to find these people again. But I know from the other neighborhoods of Istanbul that people who actually really loved the idea to go to a more like modern, and everything like nice and clean, and it looks like the the gift of the state, sort of, to live in a concrete house and modern, and then it was mostly depressive stories we started hearing, especially for women who used to have this, like, as I said, like this public life in the streets. And this was just apartments, and apartments, like, I don't know how many stories, but tall buildings. And it just squeezed them into these like boxes, basically. And the public spaces are very poor, the connection to the city. Of course, there are some public transport, but it takes ages to come to the center, and the facilities are not that good. And the access to work was the killer for many of them, because they worked in the center, and losing jobs actually ended the story or the dream of houses also, because they couldn't pay mortgages, and had to sell their right, basically. So it was not really, I mean, the social housing dream, even though it is owner occupied, is not really working in the way they are doing it in Turkey, and also in Brazil. There are stories I know that are similar.
Okay, thank you very much.
Yep.
Thank you. I would like to thank you very much, and to say that your lecture dialogues with everything that we've learned so far in this.
It's just so nice to hear.
Yeah, because we've studied queer spaces, we've studied prostitution, we've studied the intersectionality between class, race, gender. We are studying these movements of displacement and I don't know, I think that it was very amazing, not in a good way amazing, to see that it also happens in other countries, but I think that we are in awe to see that what we have here in terms of the urban struggles, it's the same. And I think that it also resonated with the class that we had a few weeks ago with Professor Sarah Charlton from South Africa. And it's amazing to see, not in a good way.
Yeah, I see how you're using amazing, Amanda. No, I have no problem with that. No worries. No, I mean, I'm really happy. It's also like it says, it took time for me to actually come to this story. And I'm quite sure I can also read a lot more stories in the story that I'm just telling you. And it's a selection. But it's not me. Life is like this, huh? I mean, develop the perspective to be able to see it. That is the art of, or the, as they call it, like, mastering science, maybe social science. That is, yeah, that is the key. And the sea of feminist literature is amazing in that sense. Seriously, I mean, it opens your eyes to many things, even in your own neighborhood, that you don't recognize happening.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
So with this,
Yes, this is the end. I see it. I feel it.
as Amanda said, you cannot imagine how your lecture connected lots of our work. We were on field camp looking for prostitution territories where we saw how they move with this renewal project. So these ideas of territorialities that change. And we also started the course talking about intersectionality, and we talked a little bit about queer space, and we talked about queer and LGBTQ. I don't know the name now, either in Portuguese, of gay territories, and we were like. And I think that especially the connection of this idea of queer spaces as a space of, I am simplifying it, but solidarity, it connected a lot of conceptual work that we made at the start of the discipline here, and with the idea of territory. And to tell you, things that we will share later after the interval here of the class should be the same test of Nancy Fraser talking about the care crisis.
Yes.
So the last point we will talk today. So you started with that. So
yes.
Thank you very much, Bahar, for your presentation, and we hope we keep in touch, and
yes.
I invite you to come if you could, and please let's share a little bit about dispossession and all of these intersectional issues. Thank you very much.
Yes, I am also really, glad that I could tell this story and I could come to your classroom through this, virtual territory. and then I wish it was face to face, and I'm quite sure you would enjoy it way better. But yeah, that's life. And thank you very much for your attention. And I'm happy to have left some questions or some interest in some of the things that I touched. And have a nice day.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Bahar.
Bye-bye. See you later.